Would Marco Rossi be a good fit on the Capitals? Next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, I take a trip down memory lane as I take a look back on the Filip Forsberg blunder. Listen, it's not often in Capitals history that I think a general manager made a big mistake, but the deal that sent Filip Forsberg to the Predators, well, that ranks right up there. I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about JJ Peterka. And would he be a good fit on the Capitals? Listen, it is the silly season. July 1st is not too far away, and the Capitals are looking to get better. They're looking to get better. They're looking to add an experienced forward. Would JJ Peterka fit the bill? But just to get it going here, one of the biggest names out there right now is Marco Rossi, and how it does appear that his time with the Wild is coming to an end. And it's not for the Wild not wanting to extend him. It's just that Marco Rossi wants to seek out greener pastures. I think was a bit misutilized in Minnesota, and Minnesota is still a team that is trying to get on the right track after the Parise and Suter thing, that they'll finally have that money off the books here in short order. So I think that it is a team in transition, but Marco Rossi, a premier talent, would he be a good fit for the Capitals? Now, before I dive into it, there's a lot of different things to look at. There's a lot of premier players that are going to be available this summer. The center market is very thin. The goalie market is very thin. And if you take a look at the Capitals as is, they're pretty well set at the center position. Do they want to shake things up by adding a guy like Marco Rossi to the mix? Let's dive into that right off the top here. And, at 23 years old, he recently turned down a 5-year, $25 million contract extension with the Minnesota Wild. And you take a look at it, I think that he knows his worth. I don't think that he is a good fit on the Wild, so I think he is seeking out greener pastures. Ultimately, he's looking for a shorter-term deal with a higher annual average value. And now Minnesota has reportedly made him available via trade, and he is listed as one of the premier offseason trade targets. So what does that mean for the Capitals? One of the things that was said in the presser with Chris Patrick is, do you plan on taking a hack this summer? And he said, I might take a big hack. I'm paraphrasing there. So is that ultimately going to be the case? And do the Capitals want to go down this road? If you take a look at it, the first line center position, Dylan Strome. Second line center position, Pierre-Luc Dubois. Fourth line, Nick Dowd with Connor McMichael is who I'm going to pencil in at the third line. Who is going to come out to accommodate that? And would the Capitals ultimately go out and try to acquire would the Capitals try to go out and acquire Marco Rossi to have him play a third line center position? It doesn't make sense. And, the thing of it is that one of the things the Capitals would have to consider if they bring in a guy like Marco Rossi into the mix is they would have to almost explore the idea of moving out a Strome or a Pierre-Luc Dubois. That if you have a guy that is an upper end talent like Marco Rossi, are you going to extend, and sign him to a long-term contract to put him down on the third line? Maybe, but I definitely don't think that that is what he is looking for. Now, Rossi is the exact player the Capitals should be looking at. If it could work, it would be perfect. He's young, he's productive, he still has room to grow. He just posted a 60-point season, 24 goals and 36 assists. So you take a look at it. I don't think that he would be necessarily a first line center, but definitely a second, I guess, in an alternate thing, you could have Pierre-Luc Dubois go down. I guess it remains to be seen. He played 18 minutes a night, and that's the thing of it is, it's not fluky. That is a guy who can drive a line. But here's the hard part. The Capitals, like I said, they're already stacked at center. Strome, your first line center, Pierre-Luc Dubois, second, Nick Dowd, fourth, and Connor McMichael is definitely going to have a kick at the can. So if you add Rossi, who are you pushing out? And can you easily justify giving up assets for a guy who might end up on your third line? I don't think it's the right idea. I think I'm doing my due diligence going over these premier talents that are going to be available this summer. And if you take a look at it, do the Capitals want to forego a young talent like a Connor McMichael, a Hendrix, Lapierre, to bring in an established player? If they could get a guy like Rossi to play the third line and they could do it, affordably somewhat, then of course that would be a great idea. But I don't ultimately think that it is the right idea. And you take a look at it from a developmental standpoint, it's tricky. I think that, Hendrix, Lapierre, depending on how he plays in camp, could start the season in Hershey. But do you want to block his path long-term? And if you shift McMichael to the wing again, you risk stalling his progress. And take a look. Rossi is a great player. He's skilled, tenacious, and fits the mold of what this team wants to be. But unless the Capitals are ready to shake up this roster, this might not be the right time. So you take a look at it. Those are the intriguing questions that would the Capitals ever entertain moving out a player, a substantial player to bring in a player like Rossi? I think that is definitely a possibility since the Minnesota Wild are looking for a trade. The thing of it is that I worry about is what would the Capitals have to give up to get a player like that? The talent is there. There is no doubt, but it's just trying to work him into this current roster. When I take a look at the Capitals, there is not a lot that I would change. Just based on what we saw from the team last year, what they did in the playoffs, they stumbled, they tripped against the Carolina Hurricanes, but that doesn't mean you need to shake everything up. That doesn't mean you need to kick all these players out because they only made it to the second round. The Capitals don't need a lot. Would Marco Rossi be a great addition? Yes. But I don't think it is a part of the greater good of this team. I don't even really want to entertain the idea that the Capitals will get him cheap. It's just not going to happen. He is a premier talent. So I think that is a fun thing to dream about. It is great fodder for you to talk to you guys about. I think he would be a great fit. Yes. I don't think he is the long-term right fit for this team financially and also just given the internal options that the Capitals have available. All right, so coming up here after the break, I'll talk about JJ Peterka. Listen, he is another premier name that is going to be available this summer. Could the Capitals shoehorn JJ Peterka in somewhere? I'll discuss straight ahead. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Now, listen, I know that sometimes when you wake up in the morning, you reach for a sugary cereal or a donut, or maybe on your lunch break, you reach for a bag of chips. Why not reach for a healthier option that has great protein, is going to be good for your overall health? That's why I think you should reach for Wonderful Pistachios. Now, personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack when I'm busy, whether I'm at my desk, on a road trip, taking the kids to school. They're always my go-to snack. And, if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, well, the in-shell options are a classic favorite as well. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So talking big names that are going to be available this summer. In the first segment, I spoke about Marco Rossi. Would he be a good addition to this team? Yes. Do I think it's likely? Probably not. So let's dive into the second segment here, talking about JJ Peterka and how I think he would be a long shot fit as well, even though some people are trying to piece him in within the Capitals. Is it even something that we should even consider thinking about? I'll break it all down here for you guys in the second segment here. So to talk about it, a 23-year-old winger exploded this season with 27 goals, 68 points in Buffalo, a team that it's always going to be their year, never is their year. But still, my belief that the Buffalo Sabres are going to be a team to be reckoned with for years. Now, it gets a little bit tricky as he is a restricted free agent, and he's a legit offer sheet candidate. And offer sheets get a bit tricky as well. So should the Capitals ultimately be aggressive about trying to acquire JJ Peterka? Listen, 27 goals, 68 points on a Buffalo team that's not playing that well. There is a good upside. It's just, how aggressive do the Capitals want to be? How big of a hack does Chris Patrick want to take? So let's break it down. What would it take to acquire a player like that? The Capitals have two possible paths when it comes to offer sheets. One, go huge. Offer him north of 11.7 mil per year, but that would cost 4 unprotected first-round picks from 2026 through 2029. Now, that's a franchise-altering decision, and let's be honest, Chris Patrick isn't making that kind of move. So there is two sides of the coin. Option 2, offer something like $4.5 million a year, but Buffalo matches that in 5 seconds flat. So you take a look at it. I think that he would be a good addition on wing. Especially considering that they plan on readjusting things. Protas could move. Connor McMichael could move to the center position, that there are pieces in play. You take a look at that. Mangiapane most likely will be on the move. Taylor Radish will most likely be on the move. And Anthony Beauvillier, a player I think the Capitals should entertain bringing back, is still not a certain thing either. But you take a look at it, it's a shame. Peterka is the kind of guy you want on a next-gen Capitals team. The Capitals are going to be facing some big changes here after next season. We know it's Alex Ovechkin's final season. It's John Carlson's potential final season with the Capitals if they don't come to terms here. That you need to have these pillars going forward. Now, I know they understand these players are on the younger side of things here as well. But a player that can put up 27 goals in 68 games is very impressive. The bigger question I think that the Capitals have to ask themselves is, what level of confidence do they have in the players in-house? I'm talking Crystal. I'm talking Leonard. Down, a bit of ways, Cole Hudson, Ivan Miroshnichenko. That do they want to bring in these other players? Is that going to stymie or stunt the progress of those younger players that I just mentioned? I think that they need to entertain the idea of bringing in an established goal scorer, a big hack, if you will. And is Peterka that big hack? I don't really think it's the case. I can envision him in the lineup for sure, but I just don't think, just based on the fact of his contract and what the Capitals would have to give up, is advantageous in any way. I do think, like I said, the Capitals do need to plan for the future, as ostensibly it will be Ovi's last season, and they need bigger pillars, bigger proven goal scorers to come in, because we can pontificate, we can guess that Ryan Leonard and Andrew Crystal are going to pick up the slack where Alex Ovechkin left off, but we need more proven goal scorers. I know that a lot of players on the Capitals put up career numbers: Connor McMichael, Alexei Protas, Tom Wilson, these kind of guys. But it's not just that. Alex Ovechkin, who scores a lot of goals every year for the Capitals, they need to think about that. So I think that, when we talk about Chris Patrick talking about a potential big hack, that you start to think about those names that are available, and you try to envision where they would fit into the lineup. But that's the hard part. Here's the bigger issue. Like I said, the Capitals already have key contracts coming up. Connor McMichael needs a new deal. Martin Ferravari is due for a contract. So when you talk about big hack, you have to do it cautiously, I guess. That you can go out and get one big player, but you don't want one big player and have a bunch of other holes. I don't want to bring in a Marco Rossi or a Peterka if that means that they can't afford a Connor McMichael or a Martin Ferravari. That's not sound business sense either. So it is a tough position for the Capitals to be in, is that they want to improve, and but they also have players on the team that they would like to sign to extensions. It is going to be an interesting move to see what kind of move Chris Patrick has up his sleeve. You got to think that he is going to consult Brian McClellan, as he has a lot of miles on his hockey odometer, at least in the GM capacity, and made great decisions. That when I think about the moves that the Capitals will make this summer, think pure Luc Dubois, a guy that maybe had an off season, but overall big picture, a good upside. That's kind of what I think the Capitals are going to do. I don't think they are going to, spend a lot of money on a Rossi or a Peterka. I think that potentially they'd be better off signing a player, a PLD-esque type player, maybe a player like Brett Conley of before, a player that the Capitals really had to kind of take it down to a granular level and say, listen, I know that guy had a poor season last season, but if I want to raise up and get a 30,000-foot view, this player overall has a good upside. So, how that manifests itself, I guess it remains to be seen. I guess the big thing for the Capitals is sometimes when these decisions happen, they don't make sense. Think last summer, your initial knee-jerk reaction, no BS, I want to see receipts, that when the Capitals traded for and acquired pure Luc Dubois, your initial reaction was, great, that's going to make our team that much better. That sometimes you kind of have to look big picture. I was the same way. Pierre Luc Dubois coming here, I had a lot of question marks. So to put a bow on this segment, do I think that JJ Peterka would be a good fit on the Capitals? Of course. Do I like what the Capitals would have to give up to accommodate that kind of move? Absolutely not. Now, I know if you're an everydayer of the show, you listen to it, you got to give up something big to get something big. I say all that. If I'm talking big, really big, it's not Marco Rossi or JJ Peterka. I've talked about other big players that are available out there, Marchand, something of that nature. It depends on the posture that the Capitals want to take, right? Do they want to push all their chips in for one last concerted effort to win a cup before, Ovi goes out into the sunset? Or are they looking for overall growth, for the team for years to come? That is ultimately going to be up to Chris Patrick. But JJ Peterka, if they could get it done somehow, some way cheap, I think he would make an excellent addition to this team. All right, so coming up here after the break, I'll talk about the Filip Forsberg deal. Something that still makes me wake up in a cold sweat from time to time. I couldn't believe it. I remembered exactly where I was. Let's go over the monumental blunder that was the Filip Forsberg trade straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment here, we're talking about the Filip Forsberg trade, a deal that sent Filip Forsberg to the Predators. In return, the Capitals got Erat and Lada. I think back on it. Think of where you were the moment you found out. I remember I was at work and my phone was blowing up. I looked at it. The Capitals, they made a trade. It was on the trade deadline. And to say I was underwhelmed and a feeling of like, what did they do? What did McPhee do? I could not believe that move happened. And I remember at the time people asked the question, why? Why would they have traded Filip Forsberg? And there was some talk out there that, there was some concern about his injury and how he was going to play. And there was no clear path to him joining the big team. But look at how Filip Forsberg has absolutely killed it on the Predators. Now, I'm not the kind of guy that likes to live in the woulda, coulda, shoulda. But your mind kind of starts to wander a little bit when you think about how great the Capitals would be right now had they had Filip Forsberg. So let's dive into this. Let's reach into and tear off a Band-Aid on a really old wound and talk about one of the rare blunders that I got to say the Capitals organization has made in recent memory, somewhat recent memory. So talking about it, a painful trip down memory lane because we're still talking about it. I talk about it with people that talk about the Capitals 12 years later. Let's set the stage. If you don't remember, say you are a newer Capitals fan, it was the 2013 trade deadline. The Capitals are barely a 500 team trying to sneak into the playoffs. They need a left winger. Nashville is selling and the deal goes down. Filip Forsberg, a top prospect, 11th overall pick, is traded to the Preds for Martin Erat and McMichael Lada. The song that you hear on The Price is Right when you lose. That is what comes to mind when I think of that trade. Honestly, in that trade between Martin Erat and McMichael Lada was the big piece that the Capitals acquired there. Didn't seem like it at a time, but was at least a good contributor, at least to an extent. Erat played 62 games in DC and scored 2 goals. Now, you can try to polish that, however you want to, for a guy that was traded to the Capitals for a premier talent like Filip Forsberg, plays 62 games and scores 2 goals. That leaves a sour taste in your mouth that all the mouthwash in the world cannot get rid of. Franchise player for the Preds, multiple 30-goal seasons, 500 plus points is what Filip Forsberg was. He became a cornerstone while the Capitals were left scratching their heads. I still scratch my head on it. That I think the Capitals were trying to make a big swing, and somehow, some way, they thought that Erat was a good upgrade. To make matters worse, Nashville used their own 2013 pick to draft Seth Jones, then flipped Jones for Ryan Johansson, who eventually centered Forsberg. It's like a domino effect of smart decision that all started with one massive Capitals blunder. So what if the Capitals had kept Forsberg? Those are the things that I think about. What would it have meant for this team? Does he replace Marcus Johansson in the top 6? Does that team push to a deeper playoff run before 2018? Maybe even 2 cups instead of 1. Those are the kind of things that you think about. And, I don't like to live in that world. There is talk out there that the Capitals were thinking about tearing this team down to the studs before the 2018 season. We're talking the 16-17 season. And then something crazy happened and the Capitals won the Stanley Cup. And they decided to squeeze as much juice as they possibly could out of that Rock the Red era team. So, you take a look at it. Hindsight is always 2020. The Capitals did win the Cup in 2018. That banner's not going anywhere. But this trade is a textbook example of why you don't panic at the deadline. Listen, McPhee did some good things with this team, all things considered, but that is definitely a do-over that he would like to have back. And the big thing is you don't give up on your top prospects. And I know I've talked about it. I've kicked it around there. And I know you can't live your life like, I don't want to do this because that's going to happen. I don't want to trade, let's say a Hendrix Lapierre because bring it back to Filip Forsberg. You can't live your life, just in constant crazy mode, right? But it is something to consider for the Capitals this summer. Be wary of trading the players, the prospects, the guys that ostensibly are going to be the big players of your franchise in the future for a possibility of winning right now. So, one of the things I talked about just here a bit ago here was that the Capitals, what kind of posture are they going to take this season? Are they going to push all their chips in and trying to construct a team that is really going to give them the best chance at winning a cup in Ovechkin's last year? Then do it cautiously. Don't trade a player, a premier player. I mean, at the time, Filip Forsberg was a premier talent in the makings for the Capitals. Don't make mistakes like that. And I know it's sometimes easier said than done. Then don't make mistakes. Maybe I should do that in everything in life. I don't think that McPhee went into that thinking I'm making a mistake. I just think that it was misguided. And, that was a time that I think there was a desperation factor. Ovechkin was, markedly younger at the time, that they wanted to get a cup back then. The mandates on this team have changed year over year. You think of the last year with Laviolette, even as the head coach, there was a mandate to win a cup, set down the young players. Connor McMichael, sit down. We want the snarled old veterans on the team. That, you got to look at it, that there's been a shift in mindset. And before I'm too hard on McPhee or the Capitals, the other side of the coin is the Capitals were in a lot of a different position back then. It was a different team. And it was just a different directive of what they wanted to do. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is the above all end all is that you want to win a cup every year, of course. But I think that the Capitals now, especially when Spencer Carberry was brought in, there was more importance put on fostering the growth of the young players. I think that we need to adhere to that. I think to myself, if we could be in some kind of time slip, or if we could change up time a little bit, and Spencer Carberry could be the head coach right now, and Filip Forsberg could be the young guy on this team again, how great this team could have played. How great could Filip Forsberg have played under the tutelage of a Spencer Carberry? I think next level. I mean, you see what he did with Pierre-Luc Dubois. You've seen what he did with, Protas and McMichael, all these guys. That is where my mind starts to go. It shouldn't, but it does. The what if, the one that got away, if you're a guy, maybe there's a girl that you were really into and you just didn't have the guts to ask her out, or vice versa, whatever the case might be. It's always important not to think to yourself, man, why didn't I do that? But as a Capitals fan, I got to think to myself, and I do think to myself from time to time, what were you thinking? What could have been if Filip Forsberg was on this team and we didn't get Erat and Michael Lotta in return? Those are the things that haunt my dreams sometimes at night. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week. Available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.